The emotional perfectionism trap. Why your need to get it right is keeping you exhausted. You think your exhaustion comes from doing too much, but the deeper truth is that much of your exhaustion comes from trying to do everything perfectly. It comes from carrying an invisible pressure that never leaves your shoulders. It comes from believing every decision must be optimized. Every conversation must be handled flawlessly. Every task must be completed without error. And every part of your life must somehow reflect competence, control, and certainty. Emotional perfectionism is one of the most socially rewarded forms of self-destruction because from the outside it often looks like discipline, responsibility, or high standards. People admire it, they praise it, they call it ambition. But internally, it feels like suffocation. Many people living under emotional perfectionism do not even realize they are trapped by it. They simply believe they are trying their best. They think they are being responsible by planning every detail, double-checking every choice, replaying every conversation, and constantly pushing themselves to improve. Yet their minds never rest. Their nervous systems never fully relax. Even moments that should feel peaceful are interrupted by internal correction. There is always something to fix, something to improve, something to perfect. Their body may be sitting still, but their mind is still working overtime. This is the hidden cruelty of perfectionism. It does not allow completion. It does not allow satisfaction. It does not allow enoughness. It quietly moves the finish line every time you approach it. You achieve something, and instead of relief, you immediately begin scanning for flaws. You complete a project, and instead of pride, you wonder what could have been better. You survive a difficult week, and instead of resting, you begin preparing for the next problem. Your inner world becomes a place where nothing is ever allowed to simply be done. That kind of pressure is exhausting. And eventually your body tells the truth your mind refuses to admit. You feel tired all the time. You struggle to relax. You overthink simple choices. You replay conversations for hours. You feel guilty when resting. You fear making mistakes. You avoid starting things unless you feel certain you can do them well. You become emotionally brittle because even small errors feel deeply personal. This is not healthy motivation. This is chronic internal stress. At the root of perfectionism is rarely excellence. At the root is fear. Fear of being judged, fear of disappointing others, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not being enough. Perfectionism promises emotional safety. It whispers, if you can just do everything right, nobody can hurt you. But that promise is false. Because perfection does not create peace, it creates hypervigilance. You become emotionally trapped in a state of constant self-surveillance. Every action is monitored. Every word is edited. Every outcome is analyzed. Your mind becomes both the worker and the critic. You never get a break because the voice demanding excellence lives inside you. That voice can be brutal. It says you should have done better. You should have known more. You should not have made that mistake. You should not need rest. You should be further ahead by now. And because that voice sounds familiar, many people mistake it for truth. But it is not truth. It is pressure. It is internalized fear. It is learned emotional survival. Some people learned it in childhood, where love felt connected to performance. Maybe praise only came when they succeeded. Maybe mistakes were met with criticism. Maybe they learned early that being good meant being safe. Others learned it through culture. Modern life constantly rewards visible success. It tells us our value comes from productivity, efficiency, and outcomes. Social media amplifies this by showing everyone's polished highlight reels. Suddenly being human feels inadequate. Everyone appears optimized, so you begin trying to optimize yourself. But human beings were never meant to be optimized. They were meant to be lived. Perfectionism steals that. It steals spontaneity. It steals joy. It steals creativity. It steals courage. Because when your goal is perfection, you stop taking healthy risks. You only play games you know you can win. You avoid vulnerability. You delay action until you feel fully prepared. You spend more time planning than living. You become trapped in what feels like responsibility, but it is actually avoidance. This is why so many perfectionists procrastinate. Not because they are lazy. Because beginning something imperfectly feels threatening. If they cannot guarantee success, they hesitate. If they cannot control the outcome, they delay. If they cannot do it perfectly, they often do nothing at all. This creates a painful cycle. You delay, you feel guilty, you criticize yourself, you increase pressure, you become more anxious, you delay even more. And all the while your energy drains. Not because life is too hard, but because your internal expectations are too heavy. One of the most exhausting forms of perfectionism is emotional self-editing. This is where you constantly monitor your feelings, reactions, and expressions. You ask, did I say the wrong thing? Did they misunderstand me? Did I sound rude? Should I have handled that differently? Did I disappoint them? Hours later, you are still replaying a 5-minute interaction. That is emotional perfectionism. And it is expensive. It steals attention from the present. It keeps your nervous system activated. It drains your mental energy. It turns ordinary life into psychological labor. Many people live this way for years without realizing how tired they have become. They call it adulthood. They call it responsibility. They call it ambition. But underneath, they are simply exhausted. Healing begins when you recognize the trap. It begins when you realize your inner critic is not your protector. It is your pressure source. It begins when you ask a different question. Not, how do I avoid mistakes? But how do I stay emotionally safe even when mistakes happen? That changes everything. Because real emotional maturity is not the ability to avoid discomfort. It is the ability to survive discomfort without collapsing. Perfectionism tries to prevent pain. Healing teaches resilience. Perfectionism says, do everything right so nothing bad happens. Healing says, you can handle life even when things go wrong. That is freedom. It means you stop needing guarantees. You stop demanding certainty. You stop requiring flawless performance before granting yourself peace. You begin practicing imperfection. This sounds simple, but it can feel deeply uncomfortable. You send the email without rereading it 10 times. You let someone see unfinished work. You allow a small mistake to exist without rushing to correct it. You say what you mean without endlessly editing your words. You choose progress over perfect timing, and your nervous system protests. It feels unsafe, it feels wrong, it feels irresponsible. But that discomfort is not failure, it is healing. It is your body learning a new reality. The new reality is this: you are safe even when things are imperfect. You are still worthy after mistakes. You are still lovable when misunderstood. You are still enough without flawless performance. That is the emotional rewire. And slowly, energy begins to return. You stop wasting hours on mental replay. You stop spending emotional fuel on impossible standards. You stop treating yourself like a machine. Your mind softens, your body relaxes, your thoughts slow down. Rest starts feeling possible. Peace becomes accessible. Not because life changed, because your relationship with yourself changed. You stopped being your own hardest environment. That is what real self-care means. It is not always adding more routines. Sometimes it is removing internal pressure. It is dismantling the belief that your value depends on flawless output. It is learning how to sit with yourself without criticism. It is learning how to rest without guilt. It is learning how to fail without shame. It is learning how to be human again. For many people, this is the deepest healing they will ever experience. Not becoming better, becoming gentler. Not becoming more impressive, becoming more accepting. Not becoming perfect, becoming peaceful. Your mind cannot heal in an environment where it is constantly being graded. Your nervous system cannot rest where it is constantly being monitored. Your soul cannot breathe where it is constantly being corrected. If every thought is judged, every mistake punished, and every pause criticized, healing becomes impossible. That is why self-compassion is not weakness. It is medicine. The deepest form of self-care is not self-improvement. It is self-acceptance. It is looking at yourself honestly and saying, I am allowed to be unfinished. I am allowed to be learning. I am allowed to make mistakes. I am allowed to rest. I am allowed to be enough right now. That is not laziness. That is emotional freedom. You do not need to perfect yourself to deserve peace. You do not need to earn rest. You do not need to prove your worth through exhaustion. You do not need flawless performance to justify your existence. Your worth was never dependent on perfection. It was always inherent. And the moment you stop trying to optimize your humanity, something beautiful happens. You begin to live. You begin to breathe. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to move without fear. You begin to experience peace that does not depend on performance. That is healing. That is freedom. That is real self-care. Mind care is self-care.